I'm Yoni. I'm one of the pod leads in Montreal Analytics. We are a consulting company that consulting on full data stack. We founded in 2020 actually, and we are providing services about architecture and design, data modeling. We're working on deployment and migration, and as well we're providing services to our clients as data teams as a service. Yeah. Our mission is always to help companies to grow and innovate.
Excellent. And Jobin?
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Open George. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm a staff solutions architect and a practitioner at data analytics partnership team here at Google. I work with partners like Census and build joint solutions to help our customers like yourself. Looking forward to this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I'm Paul. I'm our director of sales here at Census. As a quick overview here of Census, we are a data activation platform built on your warehouse. So we help you sync any first-party data that you might be storing in a modern data store like Query into any of the operational tools, business tools, Google Ads, or CRM, or any other automation platform to help deliver that kind of first-party context you might have into your audience, into those tools where your business teams are living day in, day out. So with that, I would love to jump into some of our discussions for the day in terms of talking about, I think the first piece is just sort of understanding a little bit about how we think about measuring cost when it comes to not just software, but also personnel. Yoni, would love to come to you first here on this piece. I think a lot of teams, when they think about kind of the cost of a data team, they think about all the tools they use as well. But I think one thing that doesn't get talked as much about is the kind of personnel and kind of blending this together is thinking of kind of one larger cost center. Can you speak a little bit to how your customers are thinking about that today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. And one of the bigger items that is we're trying to address is the ROI, right? How the data team is bringing, and those are the toolings and the personnel is two line items that impact really the finances of a company. And I think one of the things that is really difficult to measure is the size of the company and the size of the team and the expertise that you need when you're growing and scaling. So from a small company to a large company, there are different needs, different skill sets that are growing within your company. And I think this is where it's difficult to pinpoint. Is like, what is good for medium-sized companies across all companies? What is the right balance that you need to strike? We usually know that you have teams that are about 5 people in a medium size versus a large team that can have like 10 people of teams, and they're very, very specified on their skill sets. Data engineers and analytics engineers, they have defined roles versus small companies that the roles are more ambiguous and they have to tackle everything. So that's really, really difficult. On the tooling side, what we do notice is companies, the core of the data team is really the warehouse, is where everything is really driving the cost and driving the initiatives for a data team. Because as a data team, you want to be a service team to your entire organization. And what is important there is that you are able to provide value through your warehouse to see how you're optimizing your costs, but also generating data and generating information for those businesses to make a better decision.
Perfect. I think that makes a ton of sense. Jobin, to come to you for a second here, would love to understand a little bit about how you guys also think about, recommendations and kind of tooling within the stack. I think one thing that gets asked a lot is, is there one size fits all kind of modern data stack for companies these days, right? Is there a recommendation, from ingest all the way through storage and compute that works for everybody, or how do we think about kind of selecting the right tools for the right company?
Thank you, Paul. So, like Yoni mentioned, it is going to be completely different when you compare different companies. So the use cases or each of these companies targeting would be different in different scenarios. So there is no one size fit all. When you even begin, you have to consider your capital expenses versus operating expenses. And operating capital expenses would be like getting rid of your when you are moving into MDS or some sort of modernization on top of what you have, how much it would cost you to get rid of and get started with the new stack and do the transformation while you're doing, or while during that migration or transformation phase. what are the key migration tooling you would require, as well as like the expertise you would need to hire from outside to get the job done in an effective and smooth transition manner to keep that moving, right? And once you are done with the migration, then comes all this like, hey, I kick the tire, it start running. Now the operational expenses come into like, who is going to run the show versus like what all I would need to generate actual business value out of it. Now, you have like a variety of cloud, native stacks you can, or, tools you can pick from, first party services, which say, the cloud providers provide, including like Google Cloud, like the warehouse you can choose from the ecosystem tools. And there are going to be gaps within that, like, use cases which may not be, addressable using the native tools. You'll have to look at like, third party, tools, or like, products like Census, or, something else, which would actually help you generate that value. When you try to compare all of this, it is very hard to attribute like, some sort of, data to understand like, what value you're getting out of it, as well as like, who is attributing to the most of it. The cost of ownership is going to be complete, like, from migration through the, operation and running of this. And always like, the cost could be always like, directly proportional to how much your team want to achieve and how you want to become that center of that, data driven ecosystem. If your team is actually, or your company is actually generating value out of this, definitely your requirements will grow over time. And then as in pay as you go model, the cost you attributed this year may not be, or like, this quarter may not be equal to what you thought you would have in the coming, quarter. It could just double, or like, keep increasing, and that, attribution can just diversify to, once your requirements increase, you have to hire headcount, you have to hire consultants to run the show, and it keeps on growing. So again, like, as your business is growing along with it, there's no problem in moving forward like that.
Sure. So I think two things that are really interesting there for successful teams to kind of take home is, one, the kind of goal setting, to your point, right? How do we set the appropriate goals for the data team? What are the objectives we want to hit, not just for our own kind of priorities, but also for the rest of the business? But then two, how do we measure effectively, right? How do we measure the impact on, let's say, sales and marketing and product? But then also, how do we attribute those impacts, right? I think one thing I see a lot of data teams experience is, they own the costs of the personnel and the tooling. They kind of have to justify all these big expenses, and then the marketing team, the sales team, the product team get to enjoy a lot of the benefits that data team might impart, but they don't get to kind of reallocate that benefit back to the data team and prove that ROI and saying, hey, we showed this measurable impact in ROAS for the marketing team, in sales efficiency. They kind of take all the costs and experience very few of the benefits of that. Yoni, can you help us understand a little bit what those conversations look like when you're working with data teams? How does effective planning look like? How does effective, attribution look like kind of in the real world?
Yeah, that's an awesome question that we face on a daily day with the client and with our clients. And we actually treat each project as a product, right? And we try to explain the agile way of leveraging data. So when we're saying data, use data as a service, we're also saying use the methodologies of how to drive value within the company. And the best way for us is always using the agile methodology, where you determine specific small goals and you tackle them and show value on a very simplistic cadence. And that's where we find that the clients can also show the use cases and the ROI. They can show the actual value that we generate when we come and work with the client, but as well having a framework where you know what you're going to tackle and explain to your stakeholders, here's the value and here's what we're going to do to tackle it, is really, really informative. It's done in a very scalable and measurable way, and gives people also the identity and understanding that this is what we're trying to achieve within the business and here's the value. Whereas if you're working with different frameworks, sometimes it's difficult to see the end goal, the end value of that. And what is beautiful with the MDS is that those skill sets can be applicable right away, and you can, within clicks of a buttons, you can start generating value very on an instant way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, I think you're starting to see a lot of the kind of engineering fundamentals start to trickle down into the data world, right? Not just kind of in workflows and things like Git, but also kind of the agile development framework you just spoke to. But I'm curious to hear your perspective here. Kind of what else are you seeing kind of trickle over into the data world from kind of the more kind of traditional engineering frameworks? I know one thing that comes to mind here is also the kind of debate between sort of open source and managed service. How do you see that kind of coming into organizations these days, and that decision between, do we spend the money in terms of software? Do we build on these open source frameworks? Kind of what's the right direction as data teams become more kind of built on those engineering frameworks?
Totally. We have come across, like I personally have come across customers, whose business completely run around, or it is completely driven by data they acquire from, different encounters they have, right? So, when you look into such companies, you would understand the kind of, strength they have or investments they have in their data, team. Looking at all these things, open source is not going to go away. So if you look at it like, majority of all of the products which we have at Google are the most popular ones, out there, everything is built on top of, open source. But like the more we look into it, we would see customers who are using vanilla version of open source, self-supported, running a bunch of really, really smart engineers versus as a completely managed version of open source, what we provide, like Dataflow, which is under the hood, it is open source, Dataproc, Google, AlloyDB, which is running on Postgres. All of these are open source but completely managed on behalf of the customer, so that it alleviates the pain of day to day, what do you call the headache of management, while data teams would be enabled to look and focus completely on generating revenue for the company by providing the insights at the right time, instantaneously for all the business units across, gives you an added advantage, oh, you know what, I'm not ages behind compared to everybody else there who is making money out of it. So it is time, we see a lot of migrations of self-managed open source vanilla version into fully managed or semi-managed version of open source, or awesome stacks on cloud. But it is it is the choice between the customers. We also have seen customers who have heavily invested in infrastructure, as well as teams who do that for them, as well as slowly the migration happens. So it is actually going to be the call between do you want to employ a bunch of really smart people with a mediocre platform, or a small team of smart people with an awesome platform, whichever will give you the best benefit. But often, as customers move forward, they tend to see that, okay, you know what, the investments I made may not be the right one. It is time for me to move forward, because hey, super smart people, it's really tough to keep them in the company. You find opportunities, people would move. I'm sure Yoni would have seen that in the field, people just move around, and you cannot just really trust a single person or a team to run the show for the entirety of the company's life. So it gets tricky at some point, and then we see customers migrating and adopting modern data stack as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely we see that. I think the answer is there, right, in the scalability that you want to see on the platform level. That's where the costs are coming actually into play, and that measurability that we're talking about is how do you scale out and scale in to make sure that your return on investment are actually hitting it.
Yeah, I think one piece in there that's interesting too is how you also think about the kind of stability of these ecosystems, not just from a software perspective, but also from a personnel perspective. I think one thing that I've seen over and over again is that companies will build processes and tooling that is maybe cheap from a software cost perspective, but it's reliant on a sort of single person, that kind of superhero within the company that sort of keeps the trains running on time and is kind of air traffic control for everything. Everything's run out of a script that they built years ago, and gosh forbid that they have to teach somebody else how to manage that going forward. Joe and Yoni, curious to see how you guys have seen this evolve in companies, and how you think about kind of companies building, not just resiliency, but also kind of this idea of a data culture, right? Kind of a place where everybody can kind of participate as an extension of the data team.
Yeah, I think that skill set that it becomes niche eventually can hit you down the long term. It can hit you like really difficult because people come and go and you have to replace the skill set rather than actually what you're trying to achieve on the data platform itself, right? Some examples is in my previous roles, I used to work with data engineers and we used to feed into applications like NetSuite. We used to feed some transactional information just on an aggregated level. That required some API, some work, engineering work. But now with the tool like Census, it's actually something that is becomes more scalable, easy to maintain, and you don't need to actually have that person that writes that API anymore, but you can use just a button that is a click of a button and a managed tool that does the action, the activation for you, rather than actually using some brain power to do that specific task that is already being solved by technology.
Sure, and I think it's especially kind of as you think about kind of cost, it's particularly expensive if you've invested to get this stack, get this process up and running, and then a single person leaving or taking on a new role can kind of bring the whole thing crashing down. Jovan, can you maybe speak a little bit to, you spoke to sort of time to market and time to value before as well. Curious how you're seeing this kind of play in, and from a tooling perspective, but also from a strategy perspective.
If you look at customer journey, like the biggest resistance for them is that the past investment they have made, it is tough for CIO to justify the cost you have made, and then trying to convince the CFO to provide funding to move away from the investment he made in the first place to move into something brand new, which both of them know that it is going to help the company in the long run, but the immediate capital expenses could be some of a barrier, especially in this tough economic situation. It could be tricky for customers to adopt it and just move forward. But we have seen businesses which we have examples of businesses which have done this and then progressed eventually to bring value to the entire company. By looking at the stats, they understand, okay, what, even though I've made my investments were not accurate at what I expected out of it, it could be changing over the time when I move out of it. Looking at that particular perspective, I've even seen customers I've seen data heroes leaving the companies, and then at the end of the day, the director, the particular leader would have to rely on managed services to run the show, or keep the lights on until they hire somebody, the learning curve, and bring it up. And then I've seen them moving away from that as well through the journey, and then getting into something which is more of a managed fashion, which would require less of a headache for that leader to run the show, and then don't have to be answerable to any of the downtimes or issues which you see. I still have friends who, by the way, are part of the what do you call, the SRE team to keep lights on. While you don't really have to do that in the first place to get the show, but the initial investments are kind of things which is a barrier for many companies to move forward. But any company who break that and move forward have seen that kind of eventual benefit, which takes their company really forward, and bring the return of investment, like you mentioned in the beginning. That's all it counts. How soon you can have it, the sooner you prove the value, more investment you will get into modernizing your data stack, the business will grow in accordance with that.
Right. It's almost not just time to value, it's time to onboard almost. It's, if you bring a reasonably talented new team member on, right, how many days, weeks, hopefully not months, but how long will it take for that person to understand where all the knobs and switches are, and how to kind of be as high functioning as the folks who are already on that team. How do you think about kind of building some of those processes and procedures? Is that all just about documentation, or I imagine tooling is a piece of that, but what's really critical to making that real for customers?
It's really comes to communication, but also sometimes you need to identify there's a set of skills that you really need just to kick you start. So you need to be enabled. You need to know the best practices for specific tools. This is where you want to have your special matter experts in the industry, or those we call them consultants, but people that can enable you fast and bring you that value that we're talking about, right? That the time to value is going to be expedited by X time. That is something that is really, really where we find the value in that. Like you can bring somebody like Montreal Analytics, expedite that there. But we also find ways where we sit down together with the clients and we actually sit down together and show them how to code it properly so they can learn from it. The documentation part is something that is really, really important for MTLA. As we said, we are really keen on showing and expressing and enabling, and after that we just want the client to be able to handle that MDS by themselves. And that's the beauty of the modern data stack, right? As Jobin said, like you don't want that unsung hero leave you and just be dependent on somebody that has a specific skill set. But if you have something that is more broad, requires a better and easier set of skills, that's where the team is scalable and the business is scalable. And so by providing documentation and enabling customers, we find a lot of times that's where the most or the majority of the value comes in. As well, like we do help them as well in developing the value and setting up the agile framework and working with them together on that end as well, so they understand how to deliver and have that buy-in from the CFO on the investment, right? That you really want to have. I think having not just like technological savvy person, but also understanding the business and bringing that together. That's what this industry is about, right? Understanding that gap that we as data folks, we are learning the business and we know how to address it with technological tools by having the documentation and the simple and scalable. And that's where the value is.
Yeah, I think that's where I see a lot of companies kind of, maybe cut corners or not invest fully. And what do you see as being the kind of balance between, if you think about the total time to, not just get the product up and running, get the solution up and running, but, do that kind of last mile of the enablement, the training, the documentation. What do you see being kind of the mix of time and effort in the initial build versus that kind of last piece that really kind of completes the puzzle?
I think putting it into like a bound time where you know what is the goal and what is the actual value that you want to generate and bring that MVP out of the door and to show that it works, that's where the value comes in. Once you have the MVP, you can always reiterate and keep improving it and making sure that the product that you are trying to deliver is always getting iterated and worked better and better. And I think that's something that Joven, you've seen as well from your end. It's like we're iterating on something that you've built initially always only can get better and better because what you built yesterday might not be applicable tomorrow anymore.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, with the versions and the features and the capabilities come out, we see customers adopting like, more and more, when it comes to cutting edge technologies, right? Like, the more better features come out, customers are like, really asking for it. And like, being on private preview, beta requests, while they don't want to wait for this to come out in GA and then subscribe for it. We have seen like, if it is a feature with BigQuery or if it's a new feature coming out with one of our products, the number of customers who are in private beta versus like, a few years ago is like, it's a big difference. Like, customers want to try the best, and because they understand that, something which would be coming out would be based on requests from, let's say, 20, 30 other customers. And, without seeing value, this feature wouldn't come out. And then they will be able to get that, advantage out of that feature coming out. They just want to make improvement to their stack as soon as possible so that they can drive more and more value out of the existing data stack they have.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. One thing I'm curious about for our audience here that's dialed in, are you finding that, more and more data teams kind of sit as a, sort of centralized data team, or are you starting to see more folks sort of branch out and sort of sit with the different business units? Joven, Yoni, I'm curious to see your perspective on this. I think you used to see a lot of, kind of the traditional business analyst where, you'd have a sales team and then you'd have a couple of folks sitting within that sales organization, and same thing with marketing and product. I think you're seeing more kind of unified data teams. Obviously, I think has some advantages from centralizing the stack that they use and the processes and procedures. Then I think also presents some challenges in terms of, it's a larger cost center, it's a larger kind of team to kind of justify and prove ROI for. How do you think about that balance between the kind of centralization of the kind of solution versus the kind of decentralization of the impact?
I can add my thoughts first, and then may feel free to add to it. But being on, with my experience, I've been on both sides. I've been on a siloed team which focuses on a bunch of activities, only correlating to the business unit which I was part of. And I've been on a small and medium business, data team, which the entire stack is actually kind of managed by a single team, but still we don't have access to the entire data set to be consolidated because it is living in, different teams, local storage, maybe in an Excel sheet or CSV format or something like that, which we may never get access to, or it is sitting in a shared desktop, or in a warehouse of some sort. I've seen both of that, but bigger the enterprise, it is bigger the company, bigger the enterprise, it is possible that still the data is siloed in some way, which means data leaders understand the fact that okay, it is spread across multiple locations. It is tough for me to generate value out of it and provide value back using my data team to to the entire business. This is why CIOs come to the picture, where they would be the ultimate owners, or CDOs will be the ultimate owner of the entire data stack, which means they are on a mission convincing each and every team to make sure that they can run the data show for you and help you to easily translate the messaging, or to translate the value within that data set, which you were never able to do until today easily, and then hand it over to the businesses to make use of it in some way, with respect to, say, if it is predictions, or if it is some sort of capability they provide as part of the tools supported in the MDS. I'll give it the mic back to Yoni after adding one more point here. The more which we see, there are ways enterprises or organizations are creating data marketplace within the organizations, which enable the internal audiences or customers to subscribe to a bunch of data set in a self-serve manner, because I'm the ultimate owner, I'm the data team who is supporting the entire company. I have the visibility to entire data set, and I know that this is going to be useful for each and every member of different organization. So I'm going to make sure that I create a catalog of data sets and make it available internally, company wide, so that anybody who wants access to it based on their roles and say policies and everything in place, whether they're supposed to see that or not, can apply to or can request to get access to that data set. And then the data team itself will provide the tools which are required to decode the value out of it, like if it is a BI tool, or if it is some sort of advanced analytics tool, or some sort of other stack which you are required on top of your MDS, they will provide it. We have seen partner products like, say, Colibra's Data Marketplace, or just announced a Data Clean Room, which will be coming out in Q3. And of course, Analytics Hub, which was been there, which opens up an easy way for internal audiences to share it with the rest of the organizations, or even if a customer wants to, or if a particular company wants to monetize their data by making it available to external parties, even Analytics Hub and technologies around that could help. Just wanted to add that point, showcasing how the trend of customers sharing data, collaborating internally, and then consolidating everything compared to a couple of years back. Over to you, Yoni.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point of small versus large. So that's where the difference is always coming, and I think we do see that it's easier to implement an MDS on a small to medium-sized business and have a buy-in from them, because everybody is getting the data, and the transformation that we probably will be seeing in the near future, with also the AI sphere and everything that is coming up to us, is that even the large companies will come, the enterprise level will come and start investing in those areas. We already see trends where BigQuery is being used with a lot of larger companies, and this is something that a buy-in is difficult because of large companies move a bit slower, right? So have that value showing case, and until it trickles down and explain why, that's where it's. But I think having that MDS centralized unit is something that will become more and more preemptive to every company, because the value is actually leveraging the data and the information that is being used and applied to different areas within the company. Like either you improve processes and reduce time of other folks in generating reports, or you can have data activation, generate insights, generate additional AI information. There's so many applications that are centralized to the data warehouse that the data team will become a core and a service to the entire.
I think that's really true. I think one piece I see a lot of teams kind of struggling with or going back and forth between is to what degree is the data team acting as an internal consultant, right? So being asked kind of tough questions, maybe more kind of data science questions about which direction should the business take, what features are being adopted, what's kind of the highest kind of correlation. If somebody uses X, Y, and Z functionality in the first 5 minutes, is that going to lead to them being a more successful customer long term, versus how much is the data team focused on unblocking other teams, right? Making sure that there's not a bottleneck in terms of self-service and getting access to data. I'm curious to get both of your perspectives on this. A lot of successful data teams, what side of the fence do they fall on, or is it kind of a false choice to kind of pick between the two?
The way how I see it is the data team will be acting as per the company's objectives, the OKRs, or where the company is heading. If you're in a revenue mode or versus cost mode, that's where your initiatives will be delivered to. So let's say if you're a company that really focused on, hey, reducing costs as much as possible, you might be actually putting fires on like processes and improving processes and automating those, versus if you're more on a revenue growth spurt right now, that's where you will be focusing on the embed analytics or data shares and data clean rooms. This is features that we call them data monetization. That's where it will bring you and generate revenue, and that's where the team will be focusing on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the focus, the priorities of the companies are going to be very critical when it comes to making choices, right? Like, it could be one thing, like if you are trying to cut down on expenses, like Yoni mentioned, it is going to be tricky for you to like look at avenues to expand and add something to your data stack, or like hire an expert to get the job done, versus like running the show for a downtime, and then getting everything out of it. Meanwhile, like prepare for something which is going to happen in another couple of quarters, and then expand at that point. But looking at it like moreover, the customers would be focused on getting the revenue, the maximum ROI from the investments they have made at this point. Then definitely like double down on the processes they have today, but hiring as well as like getting a consultant, versus procuring new licenses to new softwares which might improve the process, even though they know that will. It might be put on hold for for a period of time until the storm has passed, and then slowly it would be coming back to the normal pace, and then they will be ready to pick off. But it is actually kind of going to be in a balance at all times, like depending upon the current situation, quarter and year end, people will be cautious about like investing a lot, and then when the time is right, people would like the leaders would definitely make that decision to advance and move forward. Yeah.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I think one thing that stands out to me too from that is, how many companies are starting to think about, not just using kind of their data process, their data team to make better decisions, but actually monetize that data directly, right? Through kind of their first party data and whether it's, offering up data feeds as a service itself, or powering kind of different data apps. I'm curious what is sort of successful strategies look like from that perspective, and where have you seen folks kind of run into challenges from that perspective?
There are companies who do that, like the internal data they have could be valuable for external folks. Like if you look at the analytics app alone, right, there are like providers who provide data for a fee, or like there are some COVID related data sets, as well as like free data sets available for you to subscribe from. But then again, like there are vendors who monetize this data. There are like different partners which we work with in the data space who provide, or like consolidate all the data available, and then monetize it through this capability which we provide. These are the kind of things which couldn't be imaginable like quite a few years ago. Thinking about like the data which I am looking at is my data, and it is like, if I'm not using it, it is useless for others. Like, now companies are understanding that the data from the experience, like over the past couple of years, if they have acquired it, it could be useful for external customers as well. So the data team is not just making their worth proven to the internal team by not just providing data to internal stakeholders, but this could be an even awesome way for showcasing value of the data team, saying like, hey, you know what, this is the company's data we have. We think like this is going to be useful for external parties if we make it available, and we have channels to do that too. Through Analytics Hub, it could be another way for us to monetize the data we have. Making sure it's available for third-party consultants or customers to subscribe to it, and definitely they are also making use of this data, generating business value out of it, and so forth. That is a new trend which we are seeing, and there are many companies who started doing this, and I'm still currently working with a couple of them to enable and bring them up to, specifically partners to have that capability inbuilt.
Yeah, I think having seen those features that are available in the market to share the data with external parties or even internal parties. So like we often say, hey, monetize it to the external parties, but how about unblocking your sales team with the data activation, right? Like we all know that, like, hey, I will give you a bit of an insight, and then what will happen is that, oh, I can actually generate better revenue, or I can exceed that. So the data team is actually playing a really strategic role in like making sure that the data is curated in a very high quality, because this goes to third parties or even internal parties to make better decisions. And we all know that with the trends that we're seeing is that data will be like almost a hunger game in this sphere, right? It's like everybody wants it and just give it to me. But we as data team, we need to be the custodian and to make sure that the data is high quality, curated, and very, very high quality. And having that's where the cost lies.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I know it's something we get asked more and more these days is, not just deliver it to internal parties, but deliver it to customers, deliver it into the customer application itself. So the lines are certainly being kind of more and more blurred between kind of what the, traditional role of the data team is. It's gone very quickly from, the kind of old world of, the solution to everything is another dashboard to now the solution might be these really bespoke applications. So certainly moving very, very fast, but it all comes down to the simple things, and maybe not the most exciting things, but the simple things like measurement and goal setting. I'm curious how you guys have also seen to dial this back a little bit and zoom out a little bit. Even something as simple as aligning on and setting some of these definitions and goals. I know one thing that the three of us talked about was this idea of debates within companies, right? You start delivering data to third parties and to internal teams, and then you start getting into the kind of details of, okay, well, what we're starting to report on activation, right? Well, what is the definition of an activated customer, at how many minutes in the product, or how many logins is somebody activated, for us, right? If they set up a sync, if they, built a segment, right? What is that definition? I see as more data teams are getting kind of more exposure to the business, those questions are coming up, and they're good questions to ask, but how do you see kind of customers resolving these sort of definitions debates internally?
If you particularly look at it, like ultimately each and every businesses would be goaled upon, like making their sales more through the channels of marketing, and like making it happen at the end of the day. What truly changes is like if you don't understand your customer, there is no way you're going to generate business out of it. The more you collect data about your customers, better you can reach them, and then make sure you deliver what that customer needs. Understanding that and then delivering that would be the change anybody won't want to bring into an organization. So imagine like you are a customer, or you are a company who don't have insight into it. How are you going to make sure that like not just like, if you are not going to enable your sales, there is no way they are equipped to understand what the customers want, and then ultimately trying to sell the wrong things the customer would need, and then ending up like declining the sales. The simple example, right? So thinking in the same line, irrespective what your targeted customer base is, it is very important for you to understand the customers and what they need. And their behaviors is what exactly you mentioned, like, how many times they log in, where they, abandon, their, entire process. Understanding each of those things, if we try to, reverse engineer, okay, why would be the reason, or what could be the reason this particular customer or a bunch of customers got stuck at this particular phase of their journey within the app you're tracking or within the website, they are unable to, self-serve. That could be a changing point. Okay, you know what? There is some sort of friction which is not, enabling the customer to complete the transaction or complete the purchase or complete, whatever they are supposed to do there, will be tricky. And if you are a data team who is not able to provide that visibility to your problem solvers within the company, your business is set for failure. The more you have insights, the more you have data about your customers, about your business, how it can be evolved, and competitive intelligence as well, you will be set up for success. No questions there. Yoni, if you have any thoughts, happy to hear that.
Oh, when you're looking at it, what is the most expensive thing to do in a business? It's marketing. It's bringing that person or that lead to your website, or to just to hear you what you're saying, right? So not being able to collect the information on them and provide a customized or personalized approach to them actually kind of does the opposite against you, because you're not prepared to talk to them. You're not prepared to provide their needs. If they come to your website or they come to see your service, that means that they actually interested in what you're offering. And you as a data team should be able to provide insights and to be able to personalize that information to them. And I totally agree with you. The caveat lies is like, are you going to provide the wrong insights? And that's where the data team is actually coming into place. It's like making sure that it's accurate, the quality is there, the making sure that we know how many times you actually communicated with our website, and we can actually tell you what was the last communication and why were you dropped off there, right? BDRs should be able to pick up the phone and tell you, hey, how are you doing, Mr. X, Y, and Z? I saw that you've been doing that and that. You wanted to purchase this and that. This is only we're capable of doing that with the centralized and unified data infrastructure that actually allows businesses to be well prepared to talk to their customers.
I think that's really true. I see that all the time, that I think our expectations have grown a lot in terms of how much and how effectively the services and the vendors that we work with should know about us and be able to kind of contextualize for us. I know I always get disappointed anytime I subscribe to a service, or switch from being a free to a paid customer of a service, and still see buzzes to convert, or see chats pop up to say, hey, switch over your plan, and say, I'm already giving you my money. You should know that I'm giving you my money. I think that's one use case we see a lot for Sensis, is kind of connecting those dots and make sure there's not those kind of missed touch points or engagement points. Jovan, I'm curious, how you think about, coming back to where we started. I think a big piece of this is making sure that those goals are set correctly, that the teams are kind of working towards that. But I think the other piece is how do we ensure that we're delivering the right insights? How do we ensure kind of the fidelity of the product that we're delivering at the end? How have you seen kind of folks hedge against that and make sure that they're producing the right recommendations and services at the end of this sometimes fairly long journey?
Yeah, I mean, it is indeed. The investments which you are making, has to be the right ones when it comes to tools, as well as personnels, as well as hiring experts. These are all going to be attributing to the final, deliverables, which, and the standard of of that deliverable to the external teams who would be requiring it. Without having the right tools, you probably would not be able to meet the SLAs which the business team would have to take actions on. If it is delayed for any reason, it is possible that you will lose your customers end of the day to some of the competitive business out there. So it is very critical. You have to make sure that you yourself don't get lost in the marketing hype, going behind the wrong set of tools. Choose one, make sure that you choose right. Get recommendations if needed, making sure that the teams who are the expert in the space, like myself or Leone, would have experience, working with multiple customers and picking the tools which are right, like Census, to make sure that you hit the spot, ensuring it would deliver, the results on time, to make sure that you don't miss the SLAs given to you to deliver insights, which could, end up being a big advantage for your business to gain, as well as on the contrary, it is possible that things could go down the hill too.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. We've got some questions rolling in here. One question for the folks here: what are examples of SLAs that you guys are seeing within the modern data stack?
Yeah, I think it's very, very good questions, because we're all hearing a lot of terminologies, and the SLAs are really driven by the business. And that's where the data team is actually coming into place. We're talking about not technologically savvy, but also have a huge business acumen on those teams, right? And those teams need to be able to communicate and understand what does it mean SLA. One of the biggest SLAs that we have seen is hey, I need to have this data refreshed on the cadence for me to be able to generate insights. We see a lot of requirements that people are asking, hey, we want real time. But you would ask, what is a real time, right? It's a really good question. Like, a real time, is it 5 seconds, 15 seconds that you need the data refreshed? And that's where the communication most of the time falls, because people that mean real time, they just mean, oh, I need it once a day, right? So targeting that, we do see a lot of SLAs are rounding it around the 24-hour. That's where the benchmark it is. Sometimes you need it twice a day refreshed, but that also comes with the question of the cost, right? You're going to refresh your entire database. That means that you're going to cost quite extensive on the using of those computation power that the teams are doing. So it's really, the SLAs should be driven as a policy from the stakeholders and saying, we're going to provide that, and making sure that we will deliver you accurate and quality data within X amount of time. And the SLAs is not something that can be changed. It should be kind of a policy requirement. Hope that does answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I can add my 2 cents too here. If you look at the, use case basis, imagine you are a credit card customer, something, a fraudulent transaction happened on your credit card. Would you go with a card provider who provide you alerts on, within seconds, you get an alert saying hey, this particular credit card has been, we saw this activity, we are blocking it temporarily? Or you would go with a credit card provider who says hey, 2 hours ago, we we observed a activity, which could be a possible issue by the time, this could have happened, and the card was, not unlocked, and you probably will have to file a case with the credit card provider, blah, 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 blah. A lot of things like that. Now, the idea is okay, comparing SLAs, which card provider would you choose and stick with? And who would you rather, do business going forward with? So it is simple as that, the more you go behind all these, latest advancements, it is required for customers to set different SLAs, and, customer demands are just going through the roof. It is very hard for business providers to make sure they keep up with it. So SLAs could be changing different from one scenario to another, like Yoni mentioned.
Yeah, but speed definitely seems to be the common thread here, right? When the business asks for something, they need to make sure that they're getting an answer in a time frame that makes it actionable. Another good question here: in terms of biggest mistakes you see people make in standing up their data stack. Curious, Yoni, I'll throw it to you. What do you see in terms of kind of challenges or kind of easy to avoid pitfalls here?
Wow, that's a good question, because it's almost, what should you be doing, right? I think the biggest item is actually identifying your necessities, right? If you jump over to hey, I want to do machine learning right away, if you didn't build your founding blocks, you might be actually failing yourself down. I think that's one of the reasons where we talk about with clients is we're trying to understand what are you trying to achieve as an end goal, and we're trying to set the expectations of what is the right process for them at the point of time and the maturity of their data stack. It's all about the maturity and the set of skills that you have. If you have the investment money, but you don't have the set of skills of people, don't try and implement machine learning, right? But what we recommend is like build your data stack, make sure that you have a data quality. A lot of times we see implementing transformations but not putting testings because the patience to develop that habit really is not there, and it's not a priority for the team because all the requirements is to deliver the value. But it's not enough anymore. You have to make sure that you're delivering the insight in a quality fashion.
Absolutely. And Joe, obviously outside of wanting, the benefit being investing early and often in the GCP ecosystem, I'm curious what you see as being kind of pitfalls here. Obviously, a great place to spend some time, but curious what you see as far as mistakes people make.
You have to do thorough research on what exactly your deliverables are. Like you mentioned, right? We have seen customers trying to implement things which they really don't need. But solving problem, you cannot just get rid of a bunch of things by imagining that, okay, you know what, once I have this particular implementation of a tool would solve everything for me. No, you will have to be sure that what your understanding of the problem is. Make sure that you invest only in the necessary areas. And then we have seen customers, okay, you know what, since I have this particular license already, let me try to do this, which means like you're not really trying to solve any problem, but you're creating a problem and then trying to solve it, which is unnecessary, right? So those kind of things, and like I mentioned, it is very easy to get lost in the marketing hype and purchase a bunch of tools which may not be solving your problem at the end of the day, and then you are stuck with it for at least a year minimum. It's always good to not invest a lot in buying licenses for 5 years, something upfront. You go would be something which you can look at, investing small, starting small and then doing a POC and then expanding slowly, one use case after the other. Like Yoni would agree with me, one use case after the other, solve one project, complete it, and then you understand, okay, now this is gonna fly, let me onboard other workloads onto the platform and then move slowly. And then there would be a point where you can fly, and then at that time you can definitely do it. So while when customers try to solve the entire problem the company have in a single day, they often end up having issues. But our team is there to support. Partners like Census and Montreal is there to support the customers through this journey. We have seen that the amount of or the number of such occurrences, we try to make sure the customer understand it while they are in the initial phase of the journey to make sure it is smooth.
Excellent. I appreciate the insight. We are just about at time. So if there are any more questions from the audience here, last question, throw it to each of you. What's the kind of feature function? What's the thing you're most excited about from the data space kind of going forward through the next year? What are you seeing kind of the most potential for, teams to kind of adopt, processes to adopt coming away into the rest of 2023?
That's a good question. We do see machine learning as a rising component, especially with the core capabilities as a platform. I mean, when I say BigQuery, I actually mean GCP as a platform, but I think we will see a trend of more and more companies adopting the MDS, realizing what is the real value in that because the need of data and the features that the MDS is bringing. I think foundations of MDS will be something that is rising even more this year rather than the previous years, because people will start focusing on data quality and data governance because of cost imperatives. So that's what I think is going to happen. But again, I might be wrong.
Totally. I mean, being somebody who works end to end on data, what we see is more and more machine learning AI as well as generative AI conversations happening using the data stack which we provide as a base, like Yoni said, and then building on top of it. We see customers coming up with use cases and co-innovation request, which is just around generative AI, how to use it. We are enabling, I'm enabling myself to make sure I can navigate through those conversations with the customers. It is something which we see a lot, but again, it would be spanning across not just 2023, it would be going beyond that as well. So it would be constantly evolving. I would say too early to predict, but it looks like it is promising enough to build a solid foundation for many customers to satisfy